what this means is that when we were building asynchronous JavaScript and XML, just to give you a tiny bit of history, in the late 90s, early thousands, Microsoft, there was a browser war going on at the time. Internet Explorer was trying to become a dominant browser for Microsoft. Netscape was trying to make money selling browsers to people. And so there was a race to add all kinds of new features. At the time, Microsoft had Outlook. They built a web-based version of that, and they wanted to have it so that you could see when your email came in, if you got a new message, if you got a new email. They wanted to have that show up in your inbox without having to reload the page. Previously, places like Yahoo and Hotmail, if you guys remember back that far, you'd have to click the refresh button or reload button just to see if new messages came in. And Microsoft invented this concept using their ActiveX plugin technology called XML HTTP request. And it was such a breath of fresh air for web development that every other browser that was available at the time quickly implemented that infrastructure, that architecture, and it has become a predominant force in how we build dynamic websites today. It lets us, on all these click events when we're having a user click a button, rather than make a full round trip to the server and have that re-render the page and send the entire page back to the user, this lets us send, with JavaScript, a small little web request to the server and have the server respond back to us with just a little piece of information so we can update the page or pop up a message saying this is done. And so this technology has opened up all kinds of possibilities for us to build really cool and dynamic pages. It's kind of important because it lets us build things with no page reloads, no refreshes. Ajax traditionally has stood for asynchronous JavaScript and XML, but the name, for the most part, now just covers any type of web request that we're making to a server. As we mentioned, we were talking about JSON. JSON is the predominant language that we use to communicate with servers now, and so for the most part, most APIs that you're going to deal with Ajax are going to be done using JSON and not XML. XML is a kind of an older-fashioned language that lets us, kind of resembles HTML. It's got a whole bunch of tags and attributes, but JSON is much simpler to work with and has become kind of the default. One thing to note is that when you're making requests to web pages, right, from either a browser or XML HTTP request objects, we're going to be interested in the HTTP status codes that the server responds back to us. When we go to a website like google.com, right, and the Google responds with a page, that is a 200 error code. It's saying it's an HTTP status code of 200, and that means you requested this resource, I have it, here you go. Everything is good. And when we're in here looking at our developer tools and we look at the network tab, if we were to reload this page, you can see that all happening in real time, right? Status code 200, status code 200. That means that resource was requested, I have it, and here you go. And if we were to click on any one of these, right, you can see the response, you can see what's in here, right? This is JSON being sent back to us. Other error codes to be aware of: 400, right? This means there was some kind of server error. 500 means the server actually had a code error and had a problem. And then the one you guys are probably most familiar with is 404. 404 means file not found. There are a ton of HTTP status codes. You should be aware of them. You should be aware of how they work. But in general, the ones that are really important is 200, which means okay. 302, which means that the request was found, but it's been changed to a new address. So we use this for redirecting, right? So if you went to google.com and they said, hey, the page you're asking for is at 302 and it's at this new address, that status code will do a redirect. 404 is the file not found status code. 500, right? Internal server error. I'm sure you guys have seen that a time or two in your years of using the internet. All of these status codes are just a part of the HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transport Protocol. That specification to let us know, yeah, if the server responds with this message, this status code, our browser will know what to do with it. Okay? They're just a status code. But in XML HTTP request, we're basically creating the browser's request interface. We're creating that interface so that JavaScript is making the request instead of the browser. So we need to be able to be aware of these status codes so that we can do things with them intelligently. This is kind of a diagram loosely of kind of what we're talking about here, right? So you're in the page. An event occurs on the web page, like our user clicks a button. The HTTP request is sent to the server using the XML HTTP request object. That's what we're going to learn how to build today. That object creates the request. We're going to use a callback function that says, hey, when this request is finished, I want you to run this block of code so that I can look at the response information and update the page. And then the browser gets to display whatever we want using the same stuff that we've been doing over the past couple of days, where we're updating content in the page, we're maybe setting inner HTML equals this, or we're creating new elements, right? So all of the stuff that we've been doing, this ties in nicely with the XML HTTP request object, but we're responsible for doing all of that stuff. The browser does nothing for us. And so these are some of the methods. So let's just look through here and actually talk about how to make an XML HTTP request object. Let's pull open, create a new project here for us. Make this a little bit bigger. Good. All right, open folder. C13. I'm going to call this Ajax. Okay. It's going to be the name of my project is Ajax. And just like all of the projects, we're going to want a JavaScript folder. I'm probably going to want a CSS folder, and we're going to want an index.html. Index.html. And we'll use our little boilerplate here. And we'll say Ajax. All right. We're also going to need a JavaScript file, so we're going to call this ajax.js, and we'll load that into our code here. And so I'm going to use script source equals and then /js because it's in the JS folder, ajax.js, and I'm going to put the defer attribute inside the script tag, right? And then I close my script tag at the end. All right, so we've got, we're kind of at a good spot. We've got it so that our code can run once we start writing it. I'm going to open this with a live server. Great, we got a page here. I'm going to pull up a developer toolbar so that we can start playing with this. So let's make a new page in here. I'm going to call this page2.html. Okay, and I'm going to put in just some boilerplate in here. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put h1. This information came from an Ajax request. Okay, and then I'm going to put a p tag, and I'm going to say this paragraph came from page2.html. What are you doing? Page2.html. Perfect. All right. So this is not a valid HTML page, obviously, but it's like a snippet, right? It's got HTML in here. So let's see how we can use the XML HTTP request object to call this page and put information in here. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to create a h1. I'm going to say primary page. Okay. Then I'm going to put in a button. I'm going to put an ID equals load from Ajax. Okay. And I'm going to say in here load content with Ajax. Okay. That's going to be the button. Okay. Then I'm going to put a div ID, and I'm going to put contents is going to be the ID of this. I'm going to need all these IDs so I can know where to put stuff when I'm writing my code, when I'm writing my Ajax code. And this div is going to be blank by default, but let's maybe give this some nice styling. So I'm going to create a CSS file in here. I'm going to go ajax.css. Good. And I'm going to say contents element is going to have background color of, let's just make this light gray. And we'll say border 1px solid black. And we'll do maybe height. We'll do 200 pixels, width 400 pixels. Okay, so we should see on our page, we should see a box. Right? If we let's put some content in this box so that it has something in there. Hello, please click the button. Okay. Oh, did I misname my? Oh, I haven't loaded my CSS yet. So let's do that too. Link rel equals style sheet. href equals css ajax.css. Okay, good. And we need some margin around that, so it's not so big. So let's say margin 20px. Okay. So now this is kind of the default of our page, right? We got a button, we got a div that has the content from it from this page. But what we want to happen is that when I click this load from Ajax button, I want to create an XML HTTP request object, and I want the contents of this page to swap over. So we're going to do this a couple different ways. First off, I need to add an event listener, document.getElement by ID, load from Ajax. right? Dot add event listener, click. Okay, when I click this button, it's going to do something. So do something when I click the button. And what we want to do is this. 1, create an XML HTTP request object. 2, tell it where we are making a request. Let's name this the correct way so that it doesn't get confused. Okay. Tell it where we're making a request. See, we're gonna specify the URL we're gonna call, and then 3, we need to load, create a function to handle the response, and then 4, we need to make the request. Okay, so that's really the 4 steps of any XML HTTP request object for the most part. All right. So first, how do we create one? Right? Just like with everything else, it starts with we're going to create a variable, and we're going to say let XHR. I can name this whatever I want, but I'm going to call this XHR because it's easy and it's short to type. And it says new XML HTTP request. Right? We have just now created an XML HTTP request object. Let's Yep, perfect. Then what we have to do is we have to say xhr.open, and what it takes, the .open event, is it takes the URL we're going to try and call to. So I'm going to put in here page2.html. Okay? Pretty simple. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say xhr.onload is a function. And when we have this function, right, console.log, we just want to maybe take a look at what it's returning back to us. So I'm going to say this, console.log this. Okay? And then the final step of this is that we have to send it, xhr.send. Right? Get. And what I forgot in the .open, we have to specify what type of request we're making, right? A GET request is when we want the server to send us stuff. A POST request is when we're trying to send it data, like the form method POST. We also have 2 other methods that we haven't really talked about, but it's important to know of them. It is put and delete. So when we start talking about APIs, sometimes a good API will say, hey, when you're going to delete a record, I want you to use the delete HTTP method. It's not built into our browsers, but JavaScript can let us say to the server, hey, this is a delete. And then put is designed for updating a single record. Post is for creating a record. Put is for updating a record. In general, right, you're going to see mixed use of those 2 in your careers. These are the 2 default methods that every browser really understands, and so most APIs will just use post for anything that is destructive and get for anything that is reading, right? So if you're reading a record, you use get. If you're going to update or create or delete a record, you'll almost always use post. But some APIs will tell you that you need to use put or delete. Just be aware that that's an option. All right? And so that goes in the very first parameter of the open function. Okay? So we have our code here. If we watch our network tab, when I click on this, it's going to create an XHR request, XML HTTP request, to this page. And if we go to our console, when it's done, I did console.log this, so that's what's running here. When the XHR function is finished, it calls this function, and it's saying console.log this. So I'm logging that object out to the page. This is what that object looks like. It has all of this information in here, right? So the onload, this is our function that we wrote here. We have all these other events that could happen, right? There could be an on error, an on abort, on ready state change, which we'll take a look at here in a second. And then you can see the important stuff is this is the response text, and the response are the 2 primary fields that we care about, right? This is what came back from that request. So if I was, and here's status. That's the status we were talking about, right? So the status here was 200. We asked for a file that the server knew about. It responded with 200. Okay? So I could, knowing that I want to update this element, contents, with the response from this XML HTTP request object, is I can come in here and say document.getElementById, contents dot inner HTML equals this dot response text. This dot response text. That's our HTML that's coming back from this request. So if I was to save this right now, and I click this load content with Ajax button, you're going to see this swaps out with the information from that other page. Any questions? The code to make Ajax requests is really just as simple as this. Now there's more we can do with this, for sure, but these are the essentials. Step 1, create your object. Step 2, tell it where you're going to be making a request to and what type of request we're making. Step 3, you have to define a function to let you know, hey, when this request is finished, I want to do something with it, right? We want to take the text that was sent back from the response, and then 4, xhr.send, where we're actually, this is what actually starts that request with all these 3 things that we defined. All right, I'm going to create a GitHub repository for this because I want to keep this pristine example here for you guys to see. But then we're going to explore and dive in quite a bit deeper into what we can do with Ajax. Okay. We go to GitHub, great. Click here. And I'm going to make a new repository and call it Ajax. Public. I'm not going to put anything in there because I already have a repository here. Okay, good. Copy this. I'm going to do this from the terminal so that we can practice that. I'm going to say git init, get remote add origin, and then I paste in that URL. And then I'm going to do git add dot get commit dash m initial entry and good example. Okay. And then git push origin main. Okay. So there's our code. If you went and looked at this Ajax project right now, you would see exactly that. So let's take a look at what else we can do. I'm going to make a brand new page. Yep, let's make a new file. I'm going to call this ajax.json.html. Okay? Because that's really what we care about in terms of Ajax, right? We want to have it call APIs and do interesting things for us. Okay? And so in here, I'm going to say Ajax JSON examples. I'm going to create a new JavaScript file. I'm going to call this ajax.json.js. I'm going to keep the contents here. This is pretty good. Good. Keep this as well. Okay. Perfect. So I need script source equals JS Ajax JSON, and we're going to defer that as well. Okay, so we want to give this maybe a different name, so we'll just show this off. We'll say Ajax JSON examples. All right, we'll keep the same button name. That's fine. All right, let's see. I'm going to copy all of this because this is good code. Close everything else. All right. So we got the load from Ajax button. We had the original request going to page2.html, but that's kind of just a simplistic example. What you'll generally have happen is that we will be requesting like some remote API. It'd be like HTTPS, whatever.com/API/ users, right? That would be the normal type of URL that we're going to put in here. But we're going to show this off and play with this iteratively. So I'm going to say, I'm going to make a JSON folder, and I'm going to say users.json. Good. And I'll make a new folder in here, and I'm going to say JSON. I'm going to make a new file, users.json. Okay. So let's just imagine that when I call users.json, it is an array, or excuse me, it is a object that, well, let's make it an array. It's an array of users where each user has, first name, Eric, last name, Harrison, and maybe it has like a user ID. Right? We'll say I'm user ID 1. So we maybe have a couple of users in here. Let's just say Meg, Dexter, Isla, and 4, 3, 2. All right. So when I go to this page, just in my browser, right, just to make sure that we're showing this off correctly, users.json. This is the request that we're making with XML-HB request. It's going to say, hey, fetch me this JSON resource. I'm going to bring this in and then do something with it. Okay? So if we were to call this right now, and we said document.getElement by ID contents inner HTML this.response text, it's going to literally paste in that element the JavaScript object notation string, right? So if we do eject.json.html, right? I click this, right? That's not really what we want, right? We want to do something with our JSON, just like we were doing it with our to-do list app, where we were storing this big, list of lists, and then each list had items, right? That's the kind of thing that's going to come back from our servers. So what we want to do is, just like with everything else, we're going to have to do something, and I'll maybe write a note in here, right? We'll say, our server responds with a JSON string, parse it, and then write the output to our DOM, right? So we can't just do this anymore. We're gonna have to do something a little bit more intelligent, right? It's still using this.response text, so let's create that, right? We'll say response equals this.response text, okay? Then we need to parse it with JSON.parse, right? We need to turn this into a JSON object, so we'll just overwrite it. We'll say response equals JSON.parse response. Okay, we're reusing the same variable. I could have made a new variable called let response obj, right? But there's no need. I can just say response equals JSON parse response. Maybe I will, just for the clarity. I'm going to say response obj. Okay, and so now response obj, if we were to write this to the console.log response obj, okay, and I click this button, what we'll see here is that I now have an array with objects inside of it. Just like we did yesterday, a couple days ago when we were playing with our to-do list app. It's still JSON, we've just turned it into an actual object. So what I probably want to do is loop through those records. Right, so let's do this. Loop through the JSON object, and then maybe we want to create HTML to display them. Right? So I'm going to do this the cheapy, quick way. I'm going to say let output HTML equals, and I'll put in, I'll just create a table. And then we'll say tr, let's do this as a template string so we can keep it nice and cute. Okay, so I'm going to say table, tr, th, and what do I got? Name, user ID, th, and then th name. Right, so I'm just making two columns, user ID and name. And I'm going to combine first name and last name together to make a full name. Okay, and then I'm going to close my tr. So that's the start of my output HTML. Okay, I'm going to use this string over and over and over again until I'm done. So then I'm going to say for var I equals 0, I is less than response object.length I++. I'm going to loop through this array of users. Okay, so we know that in here we've got first name, last name, user ID. Right, those are the fields that we have here: first name, last name, user ID. So I can grab them. Right, let's do that for clarity. I'm going to say let first name equals response obj I dot first name. Let last name equals response obj I dot last name. Let user ID equals response obj dot I dot user ID. Okay, so I've got my variables now. So what I want to do is while I'm doing this loop, I want to create a new row in this table that I'm going to output. All right, so I'm going to say output HTML plus equals output HTML plus, and then I'm going to say give ourselves a little bit of room. So table row, and then table cell 1 is user ID. So I'm going to say user ID, close that table. And then the second one is first name space last name. Okay, and then close that table cell. So while we're looping, we're adding new rows to our string. All right, we created a string, output HTML. When we're in here, we're saying output HTML equals output HTML plus this new information. So the string is going to grow as we loop. And then once we're done with the loop, the final thing I need to do is I need to say output HTML equals output HTML plus, and then we need to close our table. And then the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say document.getElement by ID contents.inner HTML equals output HTML. Okay, so I built a table in string form inside of our JavaScript. I've looped through all those records coming back from the table, and then I close out my table. So right now, if we were to console.log this, right, you would expect to see beautiful HTML code, right? This is what we just looped through and generated. Just HTML. Even though the response from the server came back as JSON. So we're looping through that record and we're building something beautiful here. Now, I don't want to console.log this. I want to write this to the page. Write our output HTML to the page. Okay? And so now when I click this button, you're going to see this is replaced with a table. User ID, name, right? And if we put, if we had some style in here, right? CSS, let's do TD order 1px solid black. And maybe we make table width 100%. 100%. Good. Okay. So that's our table. We just created this table with JavaScript from a request that we made behind the scenes using Ajax. Right? We called users.json and it responded with this value. Right, that was the response. It was a status code of 200. Everything was fine with the request. And then there's a whole bunch of request headers and response headers. So this is like the browser communicating to the server, I am this type of client. Right, if we look at the request headers, it's saying, I am Chromium browser version 94. I'm on Windows. Right? All this stuff is happening on every request all the time. You just don't see it. You don't care about it. But the server's, probably logging all this information so that they know, hey, 80% of our users are on Windows. Most of them use Chrome. That's important information for the server to know. Any questions about either of those two things, right? Getting JSON data back or, just directly getting HTML back. I have built in my career using both methods where I'm just going to be like, if I've got a framework where I can have a whole bunch of HTML templates that are really easy for me to like slice and dice, then sometimes it's really easy just to say, the server has this component. I just want you to send me back that component's worth of information. And then I can directly put it into the page with inner HTML. Other times, when I'm working with third-party vendors, when I'm working with a formal API, the formal API is going to respond back with some kind of JSON object. And I'm going to have to loop through it, process it, parse it, and do something with it. Both are equally valid. One is faster than the other, right? If we were doing the first version, I closed it. Right. The benefit of this is that from a JavaScript standpoint, all it has to do is shove the response text onto the page. So one operation. If there was a million users in here, right? This would have to loop through each million users building this big string before it can shove it onto the page. So this one would perform better for some types of data, some types of requests. Any questions about any of this? Go ahead.
But I mean, if I'm understanding this correctly, if you use the first one, it's not going to look as organized, correct?
You would use the first one for instances where the response coming back to you is HTML or like a snippet of HTML, right? Generally, I would build a whole bunch of components that look like this, right? It's not a full HTML document, but it's HTML code being returned. So that all I have to do is just shove this onto the page.
Okay.
There
But
are
if you want like the second example where you like are returning like tables or like any type of actual data.
no, not necessarily, right? A table can come back in here as well, right? Table. We could do tr th id name. Just we'll make a single row real quick. td one td Eric Harrison. Okay. If I go back to the first page, index, right? Anything that is HTML, any valid HTML we can send, right? We can load into the page, right? This is the table here that we just created. The difference between the two is if I'm controlling my server infrastructure, if I'm the one writing the back end, oftentimes, when we'll discuss this when we go into like back end architecture stuff, I'm going to build my page as a series of components, right? So I'm going to have a template for the sidebar. I'm going to have a template for the header. I'm going to have a template for the center content area. And if those are separated as like beautiful little pristine templates that only generate a small snippet of HTML, if I need to use an API to access them, maybe I'll tell my server, I'll write server code that says, hey, if the request coming in is from JavaScript, don't render the rest of the page, just render back the individual component we're talking about. Now I don't have to parse anything. I can just take that response and shove it onto the page. And we'll maybe show off some design ideas for that later today. That seems like a pretty good idea. This is a really cool way to make a fairly dynamic website that doesn't need a whole bunch of fluff. Maybe we'll do that later. Any questions about this? Let me check all this code in. Implements Ajax type JSON type of Ajax request. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Right. The format for using XHR is always the same. Right. You're creating your object. You're telling it what page to pull, what location to pull from. Then you have to have a function to handle, like this is our event handler for the response being finished when the XHR onload event happens. Okay. And then finally, we have to send the request. It's a pretty simple, straightforward set of code, but you will use this probably 1,000 times in your career. Maybe. I mean, you might use, there's a whole bunch of libraries that hide a lot of this functionality behind an API. One example is there's a library called jQuery, which we're not using, but their method is $.JSON, and then you put in the URL. It'd be like page2.html, and then it takes a whole bunch of parameters, right? Like method get on ready, ready is the function, right? So you might use a library that hides a lot of these default lines of code behind one single request, one single line of code. Maybe we can design ourselves an API, or maybe one of the things we could do as a project would be to design just a simple Ajax type of handling mechanism, like that. All right. It is 4:50. Let's take a first break. Come back at 5:05, and we'll start playing with remote APIs using this type of method. Okay. So what we're going to also do is we're going to take a look at some of these other ones, right? So if you click /post/1, it's going to give you a single post that has the post ID of 1. If we do post 2, right? It's post 2. It's got a different title. Okay, so let's quickly show off how we can take advantage of this type of interface. We're going to maybe play with, let's see if one of these stands out as being interesting. Maybe albums? Yeah, I'll do albums. And so what I'm going to do is, went too far back. I'm going to make a request to albums, or albums, yep. let's see what we can do here. Let's do albums 5. Oh, what happened? Albums /5. Perfect. What does photos have information? Yeah, it tells you the album ID. Photos /10. What does that give us? I think it's just one record. All right, I'm going to do this with users, and then we'll go from there. Oops. All right, so they have a users route. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new page similar to this one. Yeah. I'm going to call this users from API.html. Okay. And I'm going to create a little element here. I'm going to create a JavaScript file for this. I'm going to say users from API.js. Okay, and what we want to do here is we're going to fetch user info from remote server, right? So we're going to build a little page here that displays that information, user list, right? And so in here, I want to have users from API.html, right? I'm going to display a table on the left that has a list of users, and when I click on a user, it's going to fetch that individual user resource from the page, right? So we're going to build this out fairly nicely, right? I want to, let's say div id equals user list, div, and then I'm going to have div id equals individual user, right? So I'm going to have two divs here. And let's give them different colors. Let's link rel equals style sheet, href equals css API.css. Okay, so I'm going to make an API.css. And in here, let's do body, background color, medium, aquamarine, that's fine. Let's do font family. Yeah, that's fine. One of these. All right, and then we're going to have, what was our two? We have user list and individual user. So user list, individual user. And we'll do background color, EEE. Let's actually make a card class so we can use it for both. Card, background color, EEE. And we'll do border 1px solid black. And we'll do border radius 10px. Right, so they'll have a nice clean border. And then in here we'll say class equals card and class equals card. Right? So all I'm doing is I'm just setting up the structure. And if we put some content here, like a h2 individual user, we'll say user list. Okay. So I probably want these to be compressed. So I could do this either using the old-fashioned way where I'm going to give my elements a width and then float them to the left of each other. Right? I could do it like this. I could say width, 40%, float left. Do the same over here. Width, 40%, float left, and then maybe even here margin left. 10px, so there's a little bit of spacing between them. I could do it like this, or I could use one of the new modern CSS techniques. So let's do that. We'll do flexbox in here. So I'm going to say div class equals container. Move these all in a bit. Div, and then rather than providing heights and widths and things, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say dot container. Display flex, and I know I'm going to want to use some of the flex box specific CSS attributes, but I can never remember what they are, so I'm going to use our editor here. I'm going to click on the container that is flexed, and I'm going to click this little flex editor. Okay, so I want row direction row, that's good. I want to say align, yeah, justify content. Let's do space evenly, maybe. Yeah, that's good. Space around. Good. Perfect. So I'm going to say flex direction row, and then space. Justify content space around. Okay. So now that's the default. Okay. So when this page loads, I want to call that API and get a full list of all the users, right? So let's start from that. I'm gonna, right, we're in here, right? So let's give ourselves some notes. So call API, get full list of users. Then we want to parse the list of users and display them in, what do we call it? User list? Yeah, user list. Okay. Then we also know that we're going to want an event listener to look for a user button click. When button is clicked, call API to load that user into individual user. Right? So pretty straightforward. The logic here is not all that difficult or different from what we've been doing so far. So we know that our code is loading when the page loads. We told the script tag, hey, we need to defer this XML, we need to defer the script loading. So this page will exist before our code starts running. So as soon as we get in here, right, we know we're going to want to make, right, let's document out this, right, same rules before, create XHR object, open request to, and let's paste in our comments, right, users, copy the link address to users. Then write a function to handle the response and render our elements. Then send the request. Right? This is like step one. Load the user list. Then we're going to create in this user list, we're going to create an event listener that will look for something in here. When we're rendering our elements, we're going to need to make a button or link that will let us select an individual user, right? So we're going to, while we're rendering that code that comes back from the server, we're going to insert a button of our own so that when I click that button, it will display the user information on the right. So we're going to make another request. So let's just start off with what we know, right? I'm going to say let XHR equals new XML HTTP request. Okay, that's step one. And we're going to say XHR.open. We want to do a get method, and we want to put in HTTPS JSON placeholder type of code .com/users. Okay. And then we need to handle our response. So we're going to do XHR.onLoad equals function. And so if you remember, this .response text has our actual JSON string coming back. We're going to have to grab it, parse that into an object, and then render that into our screen. Okay, pretty simple. And then the final thing we'll do, right, render that onto, we want this to be in there as well, right? We're going to make a button. While we're doing that rendering step, we're going to add a button in whatever, maybe we'll do a table, maybe we'll do a list, I don't know. And we're going to put a button in there that will let us select an individual user. And then the final thing we have to do to kind of finish this out is xhr.send. Right? So if we were to come in here just now, just to make sure we're doing the right things, we can do console.log this. Right? This is going to be a reference to the XHR object. So we can, when we load this page, we're going to see. Oh, did I ever add this to the page? Users. Got to add it to our page first. Script source equals JS users from JS, and we need to put defer in here. Right? If we didn't put defer in here, we wouldn't be able to attach our elements. Like the XHR would fire off, but these elements wouldn't exist yet on the page, so we wouldn't be able to use anything with them. Okay. And I'm going to actually add some padding to these containers. Card. Let's do padding. 1 rem. Let's do 10px 20x, right? So we'll add a little bit of white space in here. Oh, that's too much. That's fine. Fine for now. All right. So you can see now that when the page loads, it's making that request. If we look at response text here, that's our JSON that's coming back from that server. It's the same as if we'd come here and clicked users. Right? That's the same information. If we look at it in our console, right? If we look at it in our network tab, we can see, because it has a nice, like if you click on the preview or the response element, like this is the actual JSON coming back from the server. So we're doing everything right. We made a request. We're fetching that information. Now we just need to render it, right? So the rendering step is one of the new ones. That's what we've been working on this last week. I know that some of us are still struggling. We created 2 elements, right? We created a user list element, and we created an individual user element. So we're not going to do anything with individual user yet. Maybe we'll come in here and say, P, click a user to view their details. Right? So let's do this. So we got this .response text. We first need to make this into a variable that we can use. So let's do this all in one swoop. Let response equals JSON.parse this .response text. Right? So we're just going to skip the step of grabbing it as a string. We're just going to store the object in response. Okay? And so if we just want to verify that we're doing this right, we can console.log response. And if we look at our page now, this is the actual 10 users that are coming back to us. So let's say on this page, I've decided I don't want to make a full table over here. I'm going to make a UL, and I'm going to say ID equals user list selection. Whatever. I'm going to make this user list selection, like that. All right, so I've got an empty UL here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through those users, and I'm going to add new elements to that user list, that unordered list. Okay. So while I'm in here, I need to say for var I equals 0, I is less than response.length I plus plus. Okay. Now I could do this individually. I could create a string and then wait till I'm done with everything and then write that to the page. But it's just as easy to come in here for this example and say document.getElement by ID user list selection .inner HTML equals document.getElement by ID user list selection .inner HTML plus, and then what do we get back from our object? Let's say yeah, okay, we'll just put their name in there. So I'm going to say plus li, let's do this temp li, and then response I dot name. Okay, and then we close our li. So all I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, there's already an unordered list on this page. I want every time I loop through a record, I want to take whatever's in there to begin with and add on this new record. And then the loop will be done. So I click send, and now you can see these are all the users. These are all the users. Okay. Now I said we probably need a button in here, right? So I can maybe, let's say, let's make an anchor tag. I'm gonna put this in another line, and I'm gonna say, all right, so that's our li, that's our name. I'm gonna put an anchor tag, ahref, and maybe we'll do, let's do button. Yeah, I'm gonna do an anchor tag. I'm gonna say /user, and then I'm gonna put in the response I dot ID. Right, the ID is from this element, right? It's got an ID, a user ID in here, right? And I'm going to say the class is user link. Okay, edit details. Right? So every one of those users is going to have a link here that says edit details. Now I'm not crazy about the design. We might tweak the design here, but more importantly, they have a class of user link. User link. So what I can do is I can say this. We can write our code now to capture that, right? So we're done with that part. If I click on edit details right now, it's taking me to user 1. We don't want that. We want to have JavaScript, when I click this link, capture that request and instead send it to here so that I can type in /user1. Did I pick a bad user? Users1. Yeah, perfect. So I probably want to change this link to users1. So to do this, I'm going to use JavaScript to be very clever when we write our event listener. I'm going to go and write an event listener on the parent element. So that, in this case, I'm going to say, let's do it on user list. I'll do it on user list selection, even better. Copy. So I'm going to say document.get element by ID user list selection dot add event listener click function event. Okay, so now anytime I click in this page, inside this unordered list, we're going to have an event listener for capturing it, right? So I can go event.prevent default. Okay, just so we can show this up, and I'm going to do console.log this. Good. All right, so we can click on this, right? Right now, this refers to the element that we put the event listener on. If I wanted to get the individual element that I'm clicking on, right? I'm clicking on an anchor tag right now, but it's showing the user list selection. Does anyone remember how I can reference the specific event or the specific element I'm clicking on inside a bigger element?
Isn't it large element less than the name of the small element or name of the large element?
Nope, there's a specific JavaScript function or a specific JavaScript property in the event object that we want to grab. It tells us the name already. And if we were to, like we can always console.log this event object to see what happens, right? So if I click on that, it's telling me it's a pointer event. One of these values in here is going to tell me the actual thing I clicked on.
Isn't it click?
No, click is the type. That's we did a click event. That's what captured this in the first place. But now we're trying to find out inside, right? Because we put this on the unordered list, which has everything in here. But we want to know if I clicked on a link, or if I clicked on text, or if I clicked on blank space. There's a specific property in here called target that is telling us what we clicked on. So right, if I said event.target here, and I click on some things, right? This is going to say li. This is going to say anchor tag. Right, so inside this event handler that we put on the unordered list, right? This is the unordered list here. We have a click handler on this entire thing. So anything that's inside of it is going to be handled by this click handler. We said stop the default action so that our links don't just automatically go to some place. Stop the default action, and then we need to actually make that request for us on behalf of that function, right? So I'm going to take this console log out. So we know we have event.target, right? Bar, let's do let target equals event.target, right? Just to keep us as a placeholder. Now, if I'm inside an anchor tag, I don't want to go to that link, which we stopped with event.prevent default. But what I want to do is create a new if I am an anchor tag, I want to create a request to go fetch that resource. So let's actually do this. Let's do this. Check this out. This will be cool. I'm going to copy this full link and put the entire link in here. All right, so we can show this off. Right? So /users and then the ID of the user. So right now, if I didn't have this event prevent default turned on, right? If I click on one of these details, it's going to take me to the actual record in our API. Okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave event prevent default on. I'm going to use that to our advantage. So let's log our target again. Console.log event.target. I want to see what we can do here. I'm going to click on this anchor tag. let's actually log event so I can explore these properties. I'm gonna click on this. All right, so that's our pointer event. We're grabbing the event.target, which has a whole bunch of properties in here. We want to see if what I clicked on is an anchor tag or not, and that will tell us that in here. I think there's like a tag name property. So we're just looking for the letter A or anchor or something like that. Yeah. Too far. Oh, there we go. Local name. That tells us that we're an anchor tag. Is there anything else in here? Yeah, local name. So we'll do that. We'll say if event.target.localName equals A, right? So if for an anchor tag, console.log, do the click. Otherwise, console.log, ignore it. Right? So what you'll see here, now that we have this code in place, if I click on one of these LIs, it's saying ignore it. Right? You see that here? If I click on an anchor tag, it's saying do the click. So we're in the right spot. We only want this function to fire when we click on one of these links. So this is the part we care about right here. Okay? I'll take this out. We can just safely ignore anything that is not that. We'll take this out too. All right. So when we're in here, we want to make an XML HTTP request object. Send the request to the href of our link, right? Because we have that, each of these has if you look like right in this little area of the screen, right? Each of these has an href that goes to the request. So we're going to use that attribute value to send our request to the server so that each of these is unique to whatever we clicked on. Then we're going to do the processing in here. We're going to have to copy that stuff. So let's just start with that. And then we need to handle our load event, render the info to the, what is this called? Individual user element, and then send the request. Right? So same flow as before. We're going to say let xhr equals new XML HTTP request. Okay. Then for here, right, we're doing a get again. So we're going to say xhr.open get, and then instead of pasting in the code, we're just going to say event.target.get attribute href. Right? If we were to run this, if we do this on any element in the page, right? Document.get element. We'll do query selector. Query selector. A, right? A.get attribute href is going to give us the value of that URL that was in this HTML, right? So get attribute will give us any attribute that exists in the element, right? We could do get attribute class, and it's going to give us user link. But we're doing get attribute href because we want to get this URL and use that. So we're going to do that there. That's done. Now we got to write our handling event, right? So we're going to say xhr.onLoad equals function, right? So now we're inside, right? The request is finished. We're back. So let's just console.log this.response text so we can see it. Right, let's actually put this in individual document.get element by ID individual user inner HTML equals this.response text. Right? We know it's going to be JSON. We're going to have to parse it, but I just want to, like, when I click on this link, I want to see that information shows up. And then xhr.send. We're done. So I can click on Leanne Graham, and you can see her information shows up in this page. So we're pretty close to being done. Okay. All we have to do now is decide what details we want to display in here. Right? Each one of these people that we click has their information come back to us from the server. And you can look at this on the network tab, right? We made a whole bunch of requests, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just the same mechanism. We're just saying, hey, when I click on this link, let's display it. So now we want to render this. We want to make this look nice. So let's figure that part out now, right? So let's say render the user information correctly. So maybe what makes sense for this type of thing because it's a whole bunch of key value pairs. If we look at any one of these details, let's click on that guy, and we look at our, let's just look just at our network tab. Oh. Just at the response, right? So we know we have a couple of things in here that are probably interesting to display on the page, right? Their name, their username, their email address maybe. I might want to put their address, but that seems like a pain, and maybe phone number and website. So let's just go with those things. So we'll say, we want to say name, username, email, phone number, and maybe also user ID, so we know we're editing the right person. And then phone and website. So we're gonna render just those things. Right? There's a whole bunch of other objects in here. We could put in their company name. We could put in their address. But for the sake of just getting this done quickly, so that we can start practicing this individually, let's just get this going. Right? So I don't want this anymore. I don't want to just display the JSON here. What I want to do is I'm going to go let response equals JSON.parse this.response text. Okay. And then response is a single object, right? So instead of it being an array where we have to loop through things, let's click on this guy. Right? It's just an object. So response now doesn't need any looping. So what we need to do is we just want to write our code. So we'll say let output list equals, and we'll maybe start with let's just treat this. Let's do a table. Table. And we'll say tr. And the first thing I want is I'm going to put a table header, but I'm going to put it to the left. I'm going to do like a left-right type of thing, right? So the name of the table is going to go on the left, and the right thing is going to be the value. So I'm going to put right ID, th. And I'm going to say td, and we'll put in here response.id. TD. Okay, perfect. So we're going to copy this this method for all those fields we want to display. Right. So I want to get ID, name, username, email, phone, and we need website. Okay. So this is response.website, response.phone, response.email, response.username, and response.name. Okay. So now I've got this string, I've got this table, I need to put it into the individual user element, but I don't want to overwrite this stuff. I'm going to maybe put it in here. So I'm going to change this from a div, I'm going to make a div here. I'm going to say div ID equals user details. Okay, I'm going to put a P inside of it. So we're going to overwrite the user details div. Right? So it's going to load this page. Still has a paragraph saying click the user to see their details. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to overwrite that when I get my response back. So I'm going to say I've got my output table here. So I'm going to say document.getElement by ID user details inner HTML equals output. What do we call it? Output list. So let's call it output table. So that we're output table. Okay. And if we load this page now and we click a person, we see a table with values and nice little things. Now, stylistically, I probably want to go in here and say, individual user, th. So any th that exists with an individual user, we want to do like text, align, right, so that our fields line up with our values like this. I maybe even want to say something like padding, right, 5px, so there's a little bit of a space there. Yeah, maybe even border, right, 1px solid, blue. I don't know, something like that. Maybe. I don't know. I'd maybe fiddle around with this and come up with a design that looks okay. But now I can click any individual user, and that information loads dynamically from a remote server somewhere else on the internet that I didn't write. Pretty cool, huh? Any questions? Okay. Well, now it's time to practice this functionality. We're going to spend all of today and really like most of the next couple of days is focused on this type of building stuff with Ajax. This is the fundamental building blocks of web-based development in today's modern age, so it's really important that you guys get super good at this. So what I'm going to do, what I want you guys to do is I'm going to paste you guys this link. What I want you to do over the next hour, right, because we're really going to like start, you have until 7 essentially, I want you to build a page like this one, okay, that is not going to have 2 boxes, just going to have one big box, and that big box is going to have, it's going to make a call to posts, right? So it's like a blog type of look and feel. And then what I want you to do is that for each post, right, I want you to call the comments function. Or you can maybe even call comments on its own, so you can preload them. What we want to do is for each post that's on the page, right, because they're linked by post ID, we want you to tell me how many comments that post has. So you're going to kind of build like a blog type thing. For your actual page that you're building, I want you to limit the number of posts you display on the page by default to just 10. So post 1, post 2, post 3, post 4, post 5, you're going to loop down to 10. And then I want you to display how many comments are in those 10 posts. So you're going to have to make at least 2 XML-HTTP requests, 1 to posts, 1 to comments. Then I want you to make it so that it loads all of that content. You're going to design kind of a nice looking page. My code that we did here today is in GitHub already. You can use it as a reference to see how we do this sort of stuff. But it's really important. Get your fingers used to typing these commands. Get your fingers used to doing this type of work, because this is probably the most critical thing that you will do on a daily basis. I will send you a link to this page in Slack for everybody. And at 7 o'clock, hard cutoff, 7 o'clock, we're going to show off what we've done. I expect to have everyone have stuff loaded on the page. I expect to see accounts of comments. If you got extra time, make the page look pretty. If you don't, just make sure it's loading something. Okay? I'm here the whole time. You have until 7 to get this done. Please ask questions if you get stuck. Okay? We want everyone to finish this by 7. Any questions? All right. If you need to take a break during that time, feel free to take a break, but for the most part, see you guys at 7. Go through my thought processes as I was developing it, what I was thinking, how I got here to where I am, and maybe that will help. Because I really do, when we set up these types of exercises, if you follow the steps logically that I'm telling you that I do, then at the very least, you should be able to make progress significantly until you reach a stopping point where you need to ask for help. So Josh did a really great example of this where he said, hey, I'm writing my code, this is where I'm at, and it's not displaying in the console like I expect it to, and it was really easy to get him back on track. That type of behavior is extremely important to being a software engineer. And primarily because when you're working in your day job, there's going to be lots of times when you're given a task and they say, have this done by Friday, and if you don't get it done by Friday and it turns out that you got stuck on something on Monday or Tuesday, that is that is frowned upon, for lack of a better term. So here's mine. I built kind of a new layout, right? I've got a sidebar column over here with like a little search box. It doesn't do anything. I'm just mocking it up. And then all of the articles, right? I'm loading 10, and then I have this comment link where if I click on it, it actually loads those comments as well for each of these articles. Okay. So how did I get here? I started with a blank project, and I designed the page, right? So that's what my HTML is here, right? I started with my boilerplate. I put in my style sheet, my CSS sheet. I created a top-level Flex container, right? That contains the entire page. And so this is the first Flex object, and this is the other Flex object, right? So it's going to consume as much space as it needs, and it's going to flex around gracefully, and grow and expand based on my browser size. Inside of there, right, I've got my, let's minimize the articles, minimize the sidebar. It's got two elements. I got an articles and I got a sidebar, and I made articles flexbox as well, but I said for articles that I want that one to have a flex direction of column. So instead of flexing all these boxes from left to right, it's going to flex them all up and down. Okay. Then in my HTML, I designed what I thought an article should look like, right? It's going to have a title, it's going to have a paragraph with some text, then it's going to have a link to a comment, right? And I just designed this and got it, said, hey, this looks pretty good. I fiddled with the colors a little bit until I was happy with it, and I said, hey, all right, now it's time to write JavaScript, right? Once I got my page to the point where I was really happy with it. So the first thing I did is I realized I need to load my posts. So I decided I'm going to put this in a function. Okay, so I wrote a function, load post. That's the first thing that happens. And it goes and it makes an XML HTTP request. It makes it to that post's URL. And then when it loads, and this is what I was kind of hinting at, Josh, is that I got my object. I did the exact same thing you did, where I'm just looping for the first 10. And then I literally copied and pasted this content right in from here into my template, right? So I said output is a string, I plus equaled it, and I made this template here. And then in place of each of these elements, right, wherever the title was, I just needed to drop in response I body title. Where the paragraph was, I dropped in response I body. And then the link was here, I dropped in the link ID, and then I realized I needed some extra information so that I could actually load the comment stuff. But I figured that out all iteratively once I had gotten to because the first thing I did was I just pasted in the article and it loaded all the content. Okay. From there, I said, okay, great. I put it on the page. I was loading all the content loaded just like I expected it to do. And then I said, okay, well now I want to get the comments. So I need to load the comments after the articles have been loaded and rendered on the page, right? I need this element here. I need this link to exist so that I can change its value. So in my function that is loading the posts, right, at the very end of it, when this is all done, inside my onload, I'm loading my comment count, which I wrote another function for this. It's doing the exact same thing. There should be no mystery. And what I did was, rather than go individual comment by individual comment, so making 10 requests to the server, I just said, just give me all the comments, and I'm going to store them in an array, and then I'm looping through that count. I'm storing it in the array if that value doesn't exist. So if I get to, let's pull up one of these things. Let's pull up comments, right? So what I needed to do was index this array by the post ID, right? So these are all in the first article. And then it gets to here, and this is in the second article. So what I wanted to do is create an array where I have all of the comments stored by post. So I did that here. I said, if this post ID doesn't exist in the comments by article array, just create a new empty array there. So what I end up with at the end, if I make this, let's make this window.comments by article. If I load this up, where's my page? I pull up in my console here, comments by article, right? So it's just an array of comments. And each array element is indexed, right? So array element 1 is the 5 that go in the first one. Array element 2 is the 5 that go in the second one. Okay, so now for each of those elements, and that was why I had to go up here and edit this thing to add, right? I added a span in here. I said comment count underscore ID, just has 0 right there to begin with. When this finishes running, when I loop through those elements, it says if that element exists, put in the count. Okay, and XHR send kicks that process off. So the very first thing we do is we load all the posts. When the posts are loaded, then I load the comment count. Then, because I had a little bit of spare time and I thought it'd be fun to play around with it, I added an element. An empty element here called div, and then I gave it that same kind of structure: article underscore article ID. Right. So I've got all of these elements in here that have a blank element called div. It's a div, and it says article 1 comments, article 2 comments, on and on down the list. So I said when I click this button, when I click this link here, I'm going to prevent the default so that it doesn't actually go to this page. right? If I turn this off, you can see what it did when I was just testing with this, right? Like all of these links here would take me to that API page. Okay? That takes me to the comments page, right? Posts to comments. So then I said, hey, prevent the default, and then I wrote a third function called load comments by article, and I pass in that article ID. And I got that article ID by adding an attribute called data article ID. So I am in full control of my HTML. I can add as many attributes, I can do as much stuff in here as I want to. I could have made this an ID. I could have said comment underscore one, whatever, and then split on an underscore or something. But what I did was I chose to use the data attribute. And so I grabbed that article ID. Then the final function is exactly the same as the other ones, right? We're saying I'm going to make an XHR. I'm going to load this endpoint with the article ID as the thing. So I'm going to bring in just the comments for that page. And then I'm going to pop in h3 wrote, right? Because if you go to this URL, for example, we have it open, right? The only field, like the name field in here, I think is broken in their little fake API where they put like a sentence in here. I think that's supposed to be someone's real name. So what I did was I just said, the email address wrote, and then I put in the body. Right? So when I click comments, save. When I click comments now, it loads that. Did I take this out? Yeah. It loads this up and displays those comments as a div. This took me about 15 minutes. And now, I'm fast. I know all the things I want to type. But this is the power of programming. From 0 to 100, like having if this was an actual database full with actual articles, I would have an MVP up in less than an hour. And I could be like, what do you think of this, boss? This is the power of programming. And I didn't use anything special in here that we haven't been doing for the past 2 or 3 weeks. I used 3 XML HTTP requests. I have 1 event listener looking for a click. And I'm just writing HTML to the page. Not doing anything fancy or special. The only bit that's a little bit tricky out of all of this stuff that I had to solve was the comment count. I needed to be able to have an array that would have the comments by their ID, so that when I'm in here, right, comments by article, I can put in article ID 1 has those 5 comments. Article ID 6 has those 5 comments. And to be honest, because I have this variable here, this step right here, where we're loading the comments by article, is unnecessary. I've already grabbed them. I've already stored them in an array. I could replace this entire thing, right? I could replace response here. Let's see. I could do this entire thing can be not XHR, and I could simply say let comment. I could do comments by article, and then put in article ID, right? Because I already stored it. But I wanted to show off doing a third XML HTTP request. Because generally I wouldn't even ever have this array with all my data in it, right? This is just because this API is kind of bad. So this is how you'd normally write it, where you're saying, all right, I clicked on this link, now load that page. Now load those comments. And if, in their example API, every one of their articles has 5 comments, right? There's nothing special here. But we just want to get in the practice, get in the habit of working with APIs, working with outside providers. Because when we start writing code for ourselves, writing stuff on our back end, maybe we communicate entirely through an API, and we write our back end code to be an API. So that the page loads a single page, and then all the other requests are going through JSON, through XML HTTP requests. Any questions about how I structured mine? Josh was very close. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I did have a question. So when you were talking about how you kind of made the shell of what you wanted your blog post to look like, you go up to that part of the code in your Java, on your JavaScript. I think it's, where was it? Yes, right there. So you said output plus equals. So on mine, we did the document.getElement by ID, and then the block. So how does it know in yours where to put that? I guess. Is what I'm saying.
So I wrote my HTML. So this is div ID articles. This is
Okay.
my main container, and so I'm just basically saying I'm making this HTML as an output string, and when I'm done looping through it and I've got all my articles put in this string, I'm replacing what is in that articles element to begin with my output.
Okay. Okay.
And the reason I could have done this inside my loop, that'd be less efficient, right? Every time you call get element by ID, there's a cost in terms of time to actually have the browser go and look for that element, find it. Then we're saying, hey, render all this new HTML that I'm putting in there for you. And so if I can loop through this, right, it's very easy for JavaScript to work with strings. So I'm just building a string and adding more values into it. And if I was to come here at the end and just do console.log output, right? This is what my loop is generating. Just a big HTML string with articles in it. And then at the very end of it, I just say, hey, shove it in this element that is already on the page. Your way is perfectly fine too. It's just maybe less efficient. Any other questions? I've been harping on it for like 5 weeks, and I will continue to harp on it. When you're building something new, when you're building an interface, start with the design. What are my elements going to be on the page? What are they going to look like? Get all this perfect first. It is trivially easy to go in and add the JavaScript once the page is in place. Don't start from the JavaScript ever. Start from the page. And that's why we start learning this course from the page. Like, you are going to be a web developer at the end of this. The web doesn't care about what your programming language is. You might build websites without using JavaScript at all. You might work on designs where you don't even touch HTML. You just work on CSS all day. These are the building blocks of building products together. Web pages, web applications, all of it. Rely on HTML to be the presentation layer. The CSS is the design layer. And the JavaScript is the interactivity layer. When you're building something like this from new, it's always easier to start with, like, build your design. What is it going to look like? Then, once you've got this design in place, now I don't have to go and write any crazy stuff in my JavaScript because I already know what it's going to look like. I'm just going to write my functions to actually put the data in. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I think some of my confusion in the past is when we talked about like how like Facebook, they use HTML just literally to hold like this, I guess like the bare bones, I guess. And so I thought maybe that was kind of like how you were like the more advanced or the newer ways. You don't put your structure or anything like that in HTML.
It's going to be entirely dependent on what you're building, right? You can build applications like the Facebook way, where you write everything in JavaScript, and you just say, hey, JavaScript, please put stuff on my page. I would say that's the minority of cases, not the majority. Most people build a page, and then we use Java. And we're talking purely on the front end right now, right? It doesn't talk to a server other than the one that exists somewhere, this type of code place. We're not in control of that. This is all front-end development still. We're just building the page itself. We're building the CSS. We're building the JavaScript. Doing like the Facebook way requires you it doesn't require. I mean, we could do this ourselves, but it's going to it's so much extra work to write all of that JavaScript code to just build a page structure. Like, even if like this was my template, this doesn't have to be here anymore. And so my page can be as simple as, just load the style sheet, load the script, and like we're off and running. I still need these elements to be here. Otherwise, I'd have to go make those elements myself in my JavaScript code. That's a pain in the butt. The other nice thing about this is that if I went in here and said, you must have JavaScript, right? This page requires JavaScript, right? So now what I've got is that because I built this structure, if someone visits my website without JavaScript turned on, we still have some kind of content here to display for them. And what we'll see when we start learning about the backend code, it's very efficient to build these types of HTML templates and have your server serve them, even if the user doesn't have JavaScript on the front end, because we're still going to have JavaScript on the back end connecting to our databases, filling out all this information on our page, right? I might have my backend code generate this page for me and put in our content dynamically. And the only thing our front end JavaScript is doing is that we'll build pagination in here, so I can come in here and say load more. And it's going to say, give me the next 10 articles. We're having to like invent interesting scenarios to explain why we're just working on the front end, because this is very rare. This is like super rare. Most websites, most web applications you're going to work on or you're going to see is almost always connected to some kind of server on the back end doing something with some kind of database. It's been, gosh, 20 years since I like seriously built a website that didn't have a database in the back end. And the one exception that I can think of that I've worked on in that time frame is my portfolio page, where I'm like, this doesn't need to have a database. It's just talking about me. This might be the one and only thing you ever build in your entire career that is not some kind of connected product. And even this one, it's connected in the sense that I built this form that connects to a back-end service that lets you send an email to me. So this is still kind of a more app type of app than even a traditional static website. I think it's more important if you could take away one lesson from today's exercise is how I structured and how I went about going to build this product. I started from an HTML page. You guys know how to do that. I did a little tiny bit of CSS in here. Right? This is not a fancy website. It doesn't look great. I just made it look okay. I'm not a designer. I made it look okay. Then and only then, when I had this page up and running, where it looked kind of like I wanted it to look, then I went in and I wrote JavaScript just to fetch those articles and put them on the page. It took me about 4 minutes to build this page with our template generator. I spent about 10 minutes on this, and then I spent about 8 minutes writing up this code. And a lot of this I copied and pasted. Once I got one XHR thing in here, I copied and I wrote a new function. Load something else. I pasted it in and I just changed what is the URL I'm going to. What does it do when I get my results? That's all I changed. Get super good, get super comfortable navigating around your application. Get good at, for those of you on a Mac, Command-C, Command-V, which is copy and paste. For us Windows users, Control-C, Control-V. Also, get very good at, for Mac users, Command-Tab will switch you between windows. For us on Windows, it's Alt-Tab. Right? I can move very fast in my environment by using those keystrokes. So I can build stuff very rapidly. These are the kind of things you should be practicing now, because it's going to be the difference between you being an excellent junior engineer and you being kind of a mediocre junior engineer. The more efficient you are in working in your environment, the better you're going to be compared to your peers. Right? You might go work at a big company that they hire 10 junior software engineers at a time, and they only keep 3 of them after a year. You want to be in that 3, right? Be the fastest. Any other questions? I'm going to check in this code into GitHub as well, so that you guys will have this as a reference of like another way, another approach to build apps. We're going to keep doing stuff with XML HTTP request for the next 6 weeks. This is super important. Even when we're doing stuff in the backend, our front end code is probably still going to be loading stuff with XML HTTP request. We'll probably still be interacting with JSON APIs. And I guarantee you, if you're doing anything front end at all for the rest of your career, you're probably still going to be using XML HTTP request. If you're not purely in a back end role, this is how you connect to a server and update content. Right? And we could do, right? You can imagine, right? I wrote this load posts function. If this was some kind of email client, right? What could I do to check this every minute to see if there's new articles? I could do set interval, load posts, and we check it every, 1,000 is 1,000 times 5. Right, that's 1 second. So I want to check it every 5 minutes. 1,000 times 60 times 5. Right? So I check it every 5 minutes. Now this is going to update my page every 5 minutes if there's new articles. There never will be, because this API is fake. but by writing and structuring our code in such a way that it allows us to have the flexibility to make this better in the future. Right? Now that I'm going to do this where we load posts, if there's new stuff in here, we probably want to go into our load post function and say like, hey, if there's new posts, if the content is different than what it was last time, display a box that says like, hey, do you want to load this information? Because we don't want to like lose our place if we're reading our app, right? We want to give the user control. Any questions?
When you upload that, can you? I know you've made some changes to that, like so that way it looks kind of like how you had it originally, with like all the comments and kind of spaced out.
This is how it is. This is how it's always been. I didn't take anything out.
If you look at your actual web page, you had like it broke. Yeah. What was? Oh, you just didn't load the JavaScript.
Yeah, I had JavaScript turned on.
Okay.
I have a little JavaScript toggle plugin up here.
Okay.
I use this as a developer to see like, does my page still work if someone comes here with no JavaScript?
And I've heard you say that before, but who would come with JavaScript turned off? Is that like a
people that are
security
visually
thing?
impaired? Google is another great example. They're going to come to your website with JavaScript turned off. If you want this website to be indexable by Google search engine, well, this is what Google's going to see.
So
Google
if
is
a
probably your
user,
number one user that is going to visit this with no JavaScript. And then your other big subset is people that are visually impaired. And so for those of you who go to get a job, maybe working in the government, being able to provide visually impaired website is a law, Section 508. So if you're building stuff for the government, your stuff has to work, whether they're, neurotypically, have good sight or not.
so you're saying if I typed this website, if this was an actual website from Google, and clicked on it from Google, it would take me to the site with JavaScript turned off.
No. When the user clicks on the site from Google, it's going to be if the user has JavaScript or not. Google, in order to even know your site exists, they have a spider that runs all the time. For those of you who have run servers before, you'll see Google hit your website, once or twice a week. For some websites, Google spiders our website like daily, just to see, has anything changed? All of the content of your page is the stuff that they can see in the HTML without JavaScript being available. Right? So this is all Google knows about my website. If I was building a real news website and I wanted to be able to like sell advertisements and do all that kind of thing, Google is going to think my website just says the word news and says you must have JavaScript. So when part of what makes Google or, DuckDuckGo or any of these other search engines is that they're taking the entirety of the content of your page and they're taking every single word in there and indexing it. So that if I was to search for JavaScript right now, my page would show up in the word JavaScript, probably on like page 7,000 or something. But if I actually wanted my news articles to show up in the search results, those would have to be there for Google to see. Google's not going to see any of my articles here. So it's a really good thing to get in the habit of just like, occasionally when you're building something new, depending on the audience, right? If you're building an internal tool for yourself, if you're building your roasting timer for coffee beans, like you don't have to go through this trouble. But I build stuff for users. I build stuff to make money off of. If 3% of my people that visit my website are visually impaired, I want to make sure that it works for them. If people find my website through Google, I want to make sure that Google knows what's on my website. So I'm going to go through all these extra steps to make sure that nothing is hidden. I want to use progressive enhancement rather than have the entire app built by JavaScript, which is, I think, one of the big drawbacks for JavaScript first type of designs. And I actually think over the last couple of years, Google itself has gotten pretty good. They do have some of their spiders that will run JavaScript as a part of the crawling process, so that if there was content there that was hidden or that needed to be seen, sometimes that will work. I wouldn't bet my company on it though. I need web traffic, and I guarantee you, like 40% of it comes from Google. Any other questions? Excellent discussion. All right. One thing I do want to reiterate, it kind of came up again today, is that like if you get stuck, if we're working on something, if there's if something doesn't make sense with the instructions, please, like I have nowhere else to be. This is my only job in the evenings. Ask for help. Ask for help as soon as you reach a problem, because while we want you to become self-sufficient and learn how to Google answers to your problems, like timelines are important, and if you're missing them, it's going to be difficult. So get in the habit of asking for help, whether it's from a peer. Don't ask me even. Ask Josh. Ask Olivia. Ask Eric. Ask Reef. Ask everybody. Ask for help. Software engineers are super geeky, and we love talking about why we're right about everything. And so you can ask a question in a way where you're like, that will get me fired up to talk to you for 3 hours. Like, why should you use tabs for indentation instead of spaces? I could talk about that for a month, right? People who think that you should indent with spaces are completely wrong. But they're not really wrong. It's just an opinion. But I could talk about it forever. Ask for help. Ask for help as soon as it comes up. People want to help in this career field. They want to be, they want to feel like they know things, right? It's useful. Don't get hung up on something that is easy to fix. And that's all I'll say about that. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I just want to point out we're about halfway through this class, and if you're still struggling with anything, you can set up time with Eric on Friday, or you can ask me or Selena. You can ask me anytime, really. I'll be more than willing to help you out. We can figure it out together. So ask for help.
Mm-hmm. And just to reiterate, just to like make you guys all feel a little bit better, you guys are exactly at the right spot you're supposed to be, right? The last class was struggling with the same things you guys are struggling with. And the next 6 weeks of this class are going to be more and more opportunities for you to practice and continue to practice and continue to practice each and every one of the things we've been learning over the last 6 weeks. By the time we get to week 12 and it's graduation time, you'll be like, let me at it. I'm ready to write some programs, right? Because that's how the last class was. They went from exactly where you're at today to building a clone of Twitter in the next 6 weeks. And they did it all by themselves. And it's pretty good. So do not lose heart. Stay positive and motivated. You guys are crushing it. I know this is all hard to you. It's all new, and we move super fast. Things slow down significantly over the next couple of weeks. Week 8 is really the last week we introduce new content to you guys. And then it's 4 weeks of just building every day. We're going to build stuff. So we're almost at the end of the things you have to know. And then the last week is one of my favorites, where we like practice interviewing for new jobs and stuff. That's super fun. Cool. Any other questions?